This is a demo for Colossus, our NFL lineup optimizer at dailyfantasycafe.com. We believe Colossus to be one of the most advanced lineup optimizers in the industry, and I'm about to show you why. First thing you'll do is select a site. Currently we have DraftKings, FanDuel, Fantasy Hub, and Yahoo. We'll be adding additional sites as we go along. Next, select a sport. Once again, we'll be adding additional sports as well. Below that, you have a navigation pane, which is basically a filter on the player table below. It defaults to all players, which shows quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, and defense is not displayed in all players. So if you're looking for defense, you have to click on the defense tab and go to that tab for that information. You have little roster positions next to each position, and that is for each site. So as you click on different sites, these numbers will change according to the site requirements. You also have exclude, lock, and injury tabs. If you exclude a player down below, which I'll get into more detail, you'll see that green highlight on the lock and the lock update here. If I exclude a player here, you'll see the same. So it is real time. You click on those tabs and you'll see those players there. And you can either click on the lock again or click on the exclude from these tabs as well. And that will clear them out. Injury tab, this is pulled in. You'll see a little injury icon next to players that do have an injury status. You can lock and exclude from the injury tabs as well. Has different columns including the injury and their status. Below this navigation, you have the filters and advanced options. You can click on the plus sign or the word to expand these options, and I'll get into these in a second. Next to each option, you'll see a tooltip icon, which if you hover over it, it gives you information about that option. Below that, you have advanced options. To the right, we have a search bar, and you can search for a player and just search a name or even a team icon, so a team key. So if you wanted all Cincinnati Bengals or people playing Cincinnati, you could search CIN, and you'll see anything with CIN in it will display, and you can sort as well. Each column is sortable. Below that, we have a number of lineups. It defaults to 25, but you can select up to 100. You can actually generate up to 500 lineups by using different tabs, and I'll show you that in a second. If you click this generate lineups button, it will generate lineups. For now, we're going to go through each of the options. We'll start with filters. So you can filter by salary. You can adjust this number here, click return, and it will adjust your slider. You can do the same here, or you can adjust the slider. And what this is doing is excluding players outside of your salary range. So as you adjust the slider, you'll see the exclude Boolean up here, update. That updates dynamically as you're excluding players. I'm going to set this back to include all players. The game slate defaults to Sunday at 1 p.m. We also have Thursday, Sunday after 4, and Sunday and Monday night games. As you click on these different options, you'll see the excludes, and down below in the game section, you'll see these team icons gray out. That means that they have been excluded because of the game slate. One thing to note is some of these icons have gray in them already. So for example, you can see this Raiders icon. It's a little difficult to tell, but it has been grayed out. So just you can see the gray up here for the time. Just note that and don't be confused by that. I'm going to set it back to Sunday at 1 p.m. Below that, we have a filter by team total, and this comes straight from Vegas lines. So if you wanted to filter out all teams, let's say 25 points and below. So it will actually include 25 points and above. So as you can see, 25.75, the Bills are in there. All these other sites that are below 25 points have been grayed out and excluded. It's based on the team total, which you can see below each team icon. I'm going to go back to include any. And then down below in this filter by team section, you can actually click on a time, and it will exclude all games at that time. So if I click this 1 p.m., it will exclude all the games at 1 p.m. Eastern. I can also click that again, bring them all back. I can also exclude individual teams by just clicking on the team icon, and that exclude number up there will change and update. And then you can also see the over-under and the total for each team. I'm going to close filters and open up advanced options. We have two different types of projections. We have projections for GPP and cash games. GPPs are tournaments. Normally have players with a higher ceiling, but also potential lower floor. So you have higher risk players. We've defaulted to that. And then we have cash game projections, which are players that usually have a higher floor but a lower ceiling. Next, we have the ability to exclude defenses facing offensive players. This is defaulted to on. What this means is that if the optimizer decides to put in some offensive players, you will not have a defense in that lineup that faces the offensive players, which could hurt your overall projected score. So this is an important one and normally one that we suggest keeping on. Next, we have disallow QB and RB on same team. Something similar. If the optimizer wants to put in a QB, it won't include an RB from the same team and vice versa. So if it likes a running back, it won't include the quarterback, which can also give you a lower possible score. So another one that we default on, but you can also turn this off if you like. We also give you the option of locking your flex position into a particular player position. So it defaults to off, but if you really like the values at wide receiver this week, for example, you could lock in the flex position to wide receiver, and all your flex positions will include a wide receiver. Same for running back and tight end. Now this is where our optimizer gets very advanced, a little bit different than some of the other tools out there. We have individual player exposure, which if you turn on, what it does down below in the player table, you see this exposure column becomes editable, and it defaults to 100%. And when players aren't locked, exposure means that this player can appear up to this percentage amount or below. You don't know exactly what percentage this player will appear in, but you can max them out. So for example, if you only wanted Andre Ellington in 25% of your lineups and you're creating 100 lineups, you know Ellington will not be in more than 25 of your lineups. And this can be very helpful to mitigate risk, injury concerns, anything like that. If you have multiple lineups and GPPs, you're going heavy, limit that player exposure easily just by editing there. Now, if you lock this player and also have exposure, and once you lock a player, exposure sets to 0. Once you lock a player, this exposure becomes an absolute number. So if I enter in 25% again and click return, and I generate 100 lineups, I'm telling the optimizer that Andre Ellington is locked into 25% exposure. So Colossus will include Andre Ellington in 25 of the 100 lineups guaranteed. So 2 different ways to use exposure, both very important. And then below that, we have a global player exposure. So when you see options like diversity in optimizers, if you want to ensure that no player across the board is included in more than 50% of your lineups, you can turn on global player exposure, and it defaults to 25%. But if I up this to say 30%, and different players have different limits and risk levels they like to deal with, but you definitely get into some philosophies with the exposure you want to use based on the number of lineups in the tournament you're entering. This is very critical. Mitigates your risk, can prevent you from an entire meltdown 1 week. So definitely get intimate with global player exposure if you're running lots of lineups and GPPs. So all this is telling you is that it's telling the optimizer if all the players are set at 30%, if the player is not locked, no player will appear in more than 30% of your lineups. Now, in this case, Andre Ellington is locked, so as you know, he will appear in 30%. Exactly. So 2 very powerful options. No one else has these options in this form at this time, where you can select individual player exposure on an individual level and global. Super important. So we also have a stacking tool. And when you build a stack on our stacking tool, you can save that stack, and you can actually import it into the lineup optimizer and build an optimal lineup around that stack. So if you had some saved stacks, what I would do is turn on this option. It will reset all your locks. That was that message at the top of the screen. And then you'll have a drop down where you can select those stacks. I don't have a saved stack right now, but basically you could name a stack your Bears stack or your Packers stack, and that would appear there. And then you can set exposure on those stack players. So this exposure, for example, if you did have Rodgers and Randall Cobb stack and you set this at 100%, this is actually a lock exposure. So if you set it at 100%, Rodgers and Randall Cobb would appear in 100% of your lineups guaranteed. So another really powerful tool that's complemented by our stack generator, which I'll get into a little bit later. We also have the ability to upload your own projections. You can edit projections on an individual level just by entering a number and clicking return, but you can also do it on a mass level. You click this button and you'll go to the upload projections page. Once again, select your site and select the sport. You download a player file, it's an Excel file or a CSV file, and then you add in your own projections in the column. Keep the name the same, just save. You'll get a couple messages in Excel. Just click yes, save the file, and then upload again, and you'll see those projections display here for verification, and then you override here. Once you go back to your lineup optimizer, refresh, and you'll see all your new projections in the tool. We've also had requests from users to exclude all players at once because they have a smaller pool of players they want to work with. Now, this isn't taking full advantage of the reason we built this tool, but we can see why it's an important element. You just have to be very careful because if your player pool is too small, the optimizer may not be able to generate lineups. And you're also not using the full power of the calculator that we've built, which is one of the most powerful calculators out there. So this calculator can go through millions and even hundreds of millions of lineups to present you with some of the most optimal lineups. So if you cut down that player pool, it's really not taking advantage of that logic that's been built. But it's there, and per request, you can do that. You just click exclude all, and all players will be excluded. And then you can individually unexclude players or lock players from that. Next, we have a apply models option, which are built-in projection models that we've built. We've built these models through formulas that look at historical data. So for example, yards per game allowed, if you click this, what it would do is update your projections based on the opponent and how many yards per game they've allowed and how that translates into projected points. So as you can see, as I uncheck this, the projections will change. You can also apply multiple models at one time. The Vegas total takes into account the Vegas total of that offensive team, which is a very critical one. You can see it increases and decreases based on that week's Vegas total. And fantasy points allowed is the opponent's fantasy points per position. We also have some options here to reset. So you can reset all your locks or your excludes at once. It will reset back to your game slate filter. So if I clicked, let's say I excluded Andre Ellington, you'll see 20 excludes, and then I reset all the excludes. It will reset back to 19, which is excluding that Thursday night game because I'm on the Sunday slate. So these filters up here, they give you initial sorting, but all your manual filters like locks override those initial filter sets. So the last manual click is what overrides to stay consistent. You can do the same. You can reset you can reset all your projections at once. It's a helpful tool to click these links and get things done quickly. All right, so now we're going to generate lineups. Just going to click this button. It's going to take me down to the bottom of the screen and display 25 lineups. You'll see these tabs up here, group 1. The reason there's different groups is because you can generate multiple tabs. You'll see now I have group 2. The first tab is group 1, and I can actually name this. So I can say favorites. Click return, and I can come back to this tab because I know I like it. You can also get rid of tabs by clicking the X. So in each of these lineups down below, you can actually name lineups as well. You can say car 1, just as a reminder. You'll see the salary used, you'll see the total projected points, you'll see your remaining salary, player name, position, opponent, salary, projection, exposure, and cafe value. You'll see all the players are set at 30% because we have exposure on a global level set at 30%. Down below, you can also save your lineup. So you click the save button and you'll see up here in the save lineup section, you'll see the Boolean update to 1, and there's your lineup. You can go and reference that later. You can also download individual lineups. It will download a CSV with these players, and this can also help for easy lineup entry, copying and pasting, and just saving and looking at a text file. Eventually, we'll have scripts that will help you send these lineups to the actual sites, so we'll be using these files. You can also save all of the lineups at once in the tab, and you'll see that Save Lineups tab update, and you can also download all at once, and you'll see that same download button on your Save Lineups tab as well. We have a player used tab, and I'm going to generate one more tab of lineups to show you how that works. So if you click on the players used tab, you'll see this drop down. This corresponds to the tabs up here. So if I wanted to see the players that have been used down below, I can select that tab for exposure, and you'll see the different exposure numbers and exposure raw counts. So Amari Cooper displays in 32%. And the reason sometimes you'll see a different percentages, for example, if you're generating 25 lineups, 30% of 25 doesn't land on an absolute number, so it can't exactly be 30%. So the optimizer will decide. It will usually shift 1 or 2 down based on what the most optimal lineup is. So you have exposure percentage, you have exposure number, and some other key data points to look at. And all of these are sortable as well. So that's the basic introduction to Colossus. We spoke about the stack generator, and you can find that in the dropdown. You click on stack generator, and I'm just going to show you briefly how this works when you save it and import it, because we're going to have another demo for the stack generator, another video demo. So I'm going to generate stacks. Right now it looks like I have it set to an 8-player stack. I'm going to name that stack Chargers, and I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to go back to the lineup optimizer. I'm going to go into my advanced options. Stacking is on, and you're going to see the Chargers stack there. So I'm going to run lineups with the Charger stack. Generate lineups, and you're going to see the Charger stack in all the lineups below. Super helpful, super powerful. We hope you enjoy Colossus. If you have any questions or feedback, please visit us in our forums and let us know.